my great pleasure to introduce the work of my close friend Susanne Pari. Susanne and I have been in writing groups together since the 1980s, and we continue to write together. And it's been a very nutritive and wonderful relationship, watching her work grow, sharing our work, commenting on each other's work. And I feel very invested in what she writes, almost part of it. And it almost feels like it's become a dialogue between us. And I watched her first novel, The Fortune Catcher, take shape. And what I'm going to read now is an excerpt from a novel in progress. And it approaches some of the same topics. And the story of Iranian immigrants to this country, some of whom, despite great financial success in this country, there still remains a sadness, a loneliness, a difficulty in living in a culture that's not completely their own. So this is a bit from a chapter from this novel that I hope you'll see very, very soon. His hand tingles from slamming the receiver into its cradle. A chip of plastic has flown off the machine and has been swallowed by the nap of the bedroom carpet. The one morning Yusef Jahani has slept in for no good reason, has not set his alarm for 6 a.m., and has indulged in the sight of the news anchor's sleek legs while looping the ends of his silk tie, is the one morning that the telephone rings at 9:15, and his wife is not the only person home to answer it. He shouts into the hallway, "That was your daughter!" But Gitti is already down in the kitchen. Scowling, he dons his suit jacket in one swift motion, snaps on his gold watch, and sweeps up his briefcase and descends the stairs at an age-defying clip. "That was your daughter," he barks across the kitchen at his wife's back. "Oh," she pivots from the seat, an eager smile lighting up her raccoon-eyed face. He glances at the table, an omelet, warm lavash bread, feta cheese, honeycomb, waiting for him. Gitti's smile evaporates, and her mouth twitches with remorse. "Yusef June," she pleads, "I'm sure she thought you were at the office." "Thanks to you, Gitti, I am not." She takes a tentative step forward, wiping wet hands on her apron. "Did you speak to her?" He snorts, shakes his head, and strides for the door that leads to the garage. The woman is impossible. After all these years, she still holds out hope that he will reconcile with their diabolical daughter. How has he tolerated such a simple-minded woman for 4 decades? He slides into the tumescent seat of his Jaguar. She appears at the door then, her hand raised timidly for him to wait or stop or please, and he puts the car in gear, watching her worried features grow dimmer as he backs out into the sunlight, and exhaling with satisfaction as he presses the button to close the garage door, making her disappear. She deserves it, he thinks, coming to a brief stop at the bottom of the driveway, then turning leisurely in front of a car that is, he feels, traveling far too speedily. This is what happens when a man speaks to his wife about business issues. Last night he was more tired and irritated than usual, and he made the mistake of complaining about a young Irish painting crew who had stolen the Westchester Project's only 14-foot ladder. Instead of merely listening, she started in with her pampering. "Oh, but Yusef June, you've worked like a dog all your life, and now is the time for you to rest a little." He reminded her that he was never going to be like an American husband who spent his final years grazing like an old animal on the golf course. "At least go in a little later to the office, Yusef June. You deserve it after everything that's happened to us." Right. Her suggestions were always idiotic. Going to the office is precisely what he needs after everything that has happened. Furthermore, if Gitti were a properly loyal wife, she would not be speaking to Mitra either. She was lucky that he hadn't forbidden it over the years. But what did he get for being nice? Disrespect, that's what. And that gleeful look on her face when she heard that Mitra had called, he will not let it ruin his day. He glances in the rearview mirror. Why, the pimply-faced punk is tailgating him. Not only that, the boy is craning forward and scowling and giving him the middle finger. Yusef snorts and puts his foot on the brake. At the busy Pilgrim Avenue intersection, he stops and waits for a school bus to lumber up the hill before turning. This allows him a few moments to gaze appreciatively at the condominium complex he built. Its brick veneer, white Georgian columns, and double-story sunburst windows. The yuppies bought them all. The school bus flashes its lights and begins to slow to take on a group of children. Yusef allows himself a peek in the rearview mirror and chuckles at the teenager's angry contortions. Looking back at the bus, a glint of pink catches his eyes, a shiny backpack on a little girl with black silky hair that is so familiar to him. He can feel the strands slipping like birds' feathers through his fingers. His throat constricts. He will never again experience that. That is how the memory of his lost grandchildren comes to him. Suddenly, an ambush, an attack, weakening his bladder. A gasp fills his chest. The school bus extinguishes its red lights, and a plume of gray exhaust balloons from its tailpipe. Yusef inches the Jag onto the narrow shoulder. He doesn't notice the angry yet triumphant fist of the tormented teenager thrust like a periscope above the car as it passes. His eyes are fixed on the back window of the school bus, looking for another glimpse of pink. The spell begins to pass in less than a minute, which is as long as it takes him to dial his office on the car phone and wait for his secretary to answer. "Any messages?" he demands. "Good morning, Mr. J." He sighs. Vivian will not give him his messages until he returns her greeting. It is impertinent, but she's been with him for 30 years. More important, she has a sharp mind and the quick skills of a master bookkeeper, but only requires the salary of, what do they call these? An administrative assistant. "Good morning, Vivian," says Yusef. "Any messages?" "No messages, Mr. J. Did you track down those punk painters?" "No such address, Mr. J. The phone number's wrong, too. It's a pizza place in the Bronx." He slaps the steering wheel with his palm. "I will be there in 15 minutes. He hangs up, peers in the side mirror, and peels out, setting off a cloud of gravel. He is, for the moment, himself again. As far back as anyone remembers, the Jahani patriarchs were landowners, khans. They were called, gentry. Even after the Shah's White Revolution in the 1960s, when massive plots of private land were distributed to the tenants of these khans, the Jahanis continued to profit from land-related projects. And now, in America, it is the same, though not as filthy lucrative as it was in Iran. Over the years, Yusef has slowly bought up land, using an intuition for how the suburbs will grow and sprawl, and an imagination that sees housing tracts, apartment buildings, and strip malls where forests and dairy farms stood for ages. Yusef's conviction about being a landowner is as anachronistic as his ideas about wives and daughters. A landowner is a king of sorts, and all other professions, construction, engineering, medicine, accounting, trade, government, even the arts, serve or extend from this capitalist monarch. He calls himself a developer, but Mitra is not hesitant to point out that he has become chiefly a slumlord, owning buildings in places where people he knows personally would not live, the South Bronx along the Jersey Turnpike. Low rent, low maintenance, because he can get away with it, low profile. Yusef pulls into his usual parking space and hangs his illegally procured handicapped tag from the rearview mirror. The Jahani family offices occupy the fourth and top floor of a stucco building fashioned in faux Mediterranean style. Teal-colored trim, arched portico, and pathways of tessellated pavers. The building is flanked by 20-story 1960s brick apartment houses, their air conditioning units sticking out like tongues dripping saliva. Yusef rather likes the apartment houses, had in fact considered purchasing them, evicting their fixed-income widows and bubblegum-chewing single mothers, and converting the units into condominiums. But Nizam, his sister-in-law's son, who now takes care of the company's legal department, talked him out of it. "It's not worth the hassle with the city or the bad publicity," he said. "Besides, the buildings are ugly, Uncle Yusef." This new male generation, Yusef thinks, with its power bar lunches, vibrating pocket gadgets, and diaper-changing skills, has no sense of architectural aesthetics. Sourly, he recalls how he allowed Nizam and the others to persuade him on the Mediterranean design of this, his own building, when he wanted to erect an elegant glass rectangle evocative of the Hancock Building in Boston. It had been one of his weak moments. The others are the 12 or 15, he can never remember exactly, boy children of his various half-siblings and cousins who fled the Islamic Revolution in 1979 with little more than the clothing in their Louis Vuitton luggage and the jewels hidden in the heels of their wives' shoes. Suddenly, the America he thought of as his alone transformed into a melting pot for his extended family. Some of them, thank God, moved to Los Angeles, where they marinated in a false revival of the bourgeois decades before the fall of the Shah. But the others, to their credit, obsessed over the education of their children, sent them to Ivy League schools and proffered them up to Yusef. He took them, of course. He has shown his family the benevolence that their common grandfather had never shown him. Pressing the elevator button, he chuckles slightly. Who would have imagined that he, the middle son of the second wife, orphan of a gambler and a mad woman, ignored, burdened child, would end up being the family patriarch? As the metal door slides open to admit him, Yusef smiles, just for a moment.